A charming dinner, gentle laughter, and poison poured between pleasantries. Welcome to Shadow Deduction. I'm your host, Cluecraft. Comment below where you're watching from tonight. I truly value every response. Now, let's uncover what was served. It was the sort of evening that prided itself on civility. The drawing room of Alderwick House shimmered beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, their light refracting across polished silver and delicate porcelain. A fire murmured discreetly in the grate, as though mindful not to intrude upon the cultivated laughter drifting through the air. Outside, the winter wind pressed softly against tall windows, but within there was only warmth. Of wine, of conversation, of carefully rehearsed smiles. At precisely 8:30, Lady Davenport rose from her chair with a glass of Burgundy in hand. "My dear friends," she began, her voice smooth and practiced, "I cannot tell you how delighted I am that you have joined me this evening. It is not often that one gathers such distinguished company beneath one roof." There was polite applause. Lady Davenport was a woman whose elegance was as deliberate as her enunciation. Pearls rested at her throat, and her silver hair was arranged with mathematical precision. Those who knew her would have said she was incapable of disorder, whether in her household accounts or her personal affections. The guests assembled around her were few but carefully selected. Sir Reginald Ashcombe, tall and stern, his military bearing only slightly softened by age, leaned heavily upon his cane. His sharp eyes seemed perpetually engaged in silent calculation. Beside him stood his niece, Clara Ashcombe. Nervous, never quite reached his eyes. Miss Eleanor Grant, pale and composed, remained near the mantelpiece. Her gloved fingers rested lightly upon the marble, and her gaze drifted frequently toward the hostess. And finally, Dr. Malcolm Reed, family physician and longtime confidant, stood closest to Lady Davenport herself. Each guest raised their glass. "To friendship," Lady Davenport concluded. "To friendship," they echoed. Glasses touched. Wine was sipped. Conversation resumed. And then, as effortlessly as a page turning in a book, the atmosphere shifted. Lady Davenport faltered. It was not dramatic at first, merely a hesitation mid-sentence. Her hand trembled just slightly, and a faint crease appeared between her brows. "My apologies," she murmured, pressing her fingertips to her lips. Dr. Reed stepped forward instantly. "Are you unwell?" She attempted to reply. No words came. The glass slipped from her grasp and shattered upon the polished floor, red wine bleeding outward like a spreading accusation. Lady Davenport collapsed. The room erupted, not in hysteria, but in contained panic. Chairs scraped. Clara gasped. Sir Reginald barked an order no one obeyed. Mr. Lyle backed away, his face drained of color. Dr. Reed knelt beside the fallen woman. "Stand back," he commanded. But even before his fingers found her pulse, before his ear hovered near her lips, something had already settled over the room, a certainty as cold as the winter pressing against the windows. Lady Davenport was dead. Dr. Reed rose slowly. It was her heart, he said, though there was hesitation in his tone. She had mentioned fatigue earlier. "Her heart," Clara whispered. "Yes," he repeated. "Quite sudden. Very unfortunate." Sir Reginald stared at the shattered glass on the floor. "Unfortunate," he echoed quietly. Yet Miss Eleanor Grant had not moved. Her eyes were fixed, not on the body, but on the remnants of wine staining the carpet. And Mr. Benedict Lyle, though pale, seemed less shocked than thoughtful. Within minutes, the staff had been summoned. The body was carried upstairs. Curtains were drawn. The dinner party, it seemed, had ended. But whispers lingered long after the last echo of Lady Davenport's fall. It was Dr. Reed who first voiced what the others dared not. "We must be cautious," he said later that evening. Are certain possibilities? Clara's eyes are certain possibilities. Clara's eyes widened. You don't mean— I mean nothing, the doctor interrupted quickly. Merely that sudden deaths are not always as they appear. There was silence. Then Mr. Lyle spoke. If there is the slightest uncertainty, he said carefully, perhaps the authorities should be notified. Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. Are you suggesting something criminal? I suggest only prudence. Miss Grant finally turned from the carpet. Lady Davenport was not ill, she said quietly. Not in any way that would cause that. All eyes turned to Dr. Reed. The doctor hesitated. She was not in immediate danger, he admitted. The word poison was not spoken, but it was present, in the silence, in the glances, in the untouched wine glasses resting upon the table. By the following afternoon, official confirmation arrived. There had been poison in the Burgundy, a rare compound, colorless, nearly tasteless, swift in its effect. It had been introduced into Lady Davenport's glass alone. The household was discreetly sealed from outside interference. The guests were requested, not asked, to remain available for questioning. And somewhere in the quiet corridors of the house, as winter sunlight filtered weakly through frosted windows, a telegram was sent. It contained only a brief message, a delicate matter requiring discretion and psychological insight. Poison administered in company. Closed circle of suspects. Immediate assistance requested. Now the reply arrived within hours. 2 days later, a small, immaculately dressed gentleman stepped from a carriage at the gates of Alderwick House. His shoes gleamed despite the muddy drive. His mustache was perfectly waxed. His gaze swept the estate with quiet approval, though a faint wrinkle appeared at the sight of gravel displaced unevenly near the entrance. Order, he murmured to himself. It is everything. He adjusted his gloves. Behind him trailed a loyal companion, notebook in hand. My dear Poirot, the companion remarked, it seems a straightforward case. Poison at dinner, surely someone with access to the glass. Mon ami, said Hercule Poirot gently, raising one perfectly manicured finger, there is nothing straightforward about murder committed with politeness. He glanced toward the tall windows of Alderwick House. They were conversing, n'est-ce pas? Smiling, toasting. Yes. Ah. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. Then we must not look at the poison alone. He tapped his temple. We must look at the conversation. And with that, Hercule Poirot approached the house where civility had concealed something far more dangerous than hatred. It had concealed intention. Poirot entered Alderwick House as though he were stepping into a room that had offended him slightly by existing without his approval. He removed his gloves with meticulous care, as if the very act of touching the banister demanded moral consideration, and paused an instant to inspect the marble tiles in the entrance hall. One was set fractionally higher than its neighbor. His eyes rested upon it with a sadness reserved for small tragedies. It is always the same, he murmured. Even in the houses of those who love order, there is a flaw. My companion made a vague sound of agreement and looked past him into the somber interior. The air smelled faintly of polish and cold ash. Somewhere deeper in the house, a clock struck the quarter with a solemnity that seemed almost reproachful. A maid appeared, young, white-faced, eager to be useful and terrified of doing so. She led us into a morning room where the fire had been coaxed into life, but could not warm the atmosphere. Dr. Malcolm Reed rose to meet us at once. He had the drawn look of a man who had slept in short fragments, each fragment haunted by responsibility. Monsieur Poirot, he said, extending his hand. I'm grateful you came so quickly. Poirot's handshake was brief, gentle, and oddly final, like a seal pressed to wax. My dear doctor, said Poirot, when there is poison served with polite conversation, time is, how do you say, an accomplice. Dr. Reed's mouth tightened. You believe we are in danger still. I believe, Poirot corrected softly, that your murderer is not a person who panics. Such a one arranges. Such a one waits. And such a one, when he has begun, does not always stop because it would be inconvenient. The doctor's glance flicked involuntarily toward the door, as if expecting to see the other guests listening. They are all still here, he said. As requested. As required, Poirot amended, and then, without invitation, took the chair closest to the fire, arranging his coat with reverent precision. Tell me, Doctor, you were present when the lady died. You were closest. You were perhaps the one who touched her last. Dr. Reed flinched. So yes. And yet you did not at once cry out, poison. You said it was the heart. The doctor colored, because it might have been. Sudden collapse. She had complained earlier of fatigue. Poirot's eyes remained mild. And you wished to calm them, to keep order. Admirable. But now we have the truth. The Burgundy was poisoned. Yes, said Dr. Reed. A compound the police surgeon described as rare. There are already questions about how it could have been obtained. Poirot tilted his head. Ah, the police surgeon. The authorities then are involved? Dr. Reed hesitated. They were notified, of course. There is an inspector due, but Lady Davenport's affairs, her reputation, there was hope of discretion. Poirot's moustache bristled faintly, a sign I came to recognize as displeasure. Discretion, he said, is often the word polite society uses when it wishes to hide its stains beneath a carpet. But murder, Doctor, leaves a smell that no carpet can keep. Dr. Reed swallowed. There is also another matter, something Lady Davenport intended to announce at dinner. Poirot's gaze sharpened, though his voice did not. Ah, she had been troubled for weeks, the doctor continued. She told me she felt cornered. She said someone close to her was being, how shall I put it, improper. Blackmailed, I ventured. Dr. Reed looked relieved that I had supplied the ugly word. Yes, she never said it directly, but she implied it. She believed money had been disappearing, and there was talk of a letter. A letter, Poirot repeated, tasting the phrase as one might taste a suspicious broth. What kind of letter? I do not know, said Dr. Reed. She would not show it to me. She said she meant to settle the matter herself. Poirot leaned back slightly, his hands forming a little steeple over his stomach. And so, he murmured, she gathers her guests. A dinner of friends. High society. Polite conversation. Dr. Reed nodded slowly. It was not only friends. Some were necessary. Poirot's eyes flicked toward him. Necessary. Yes. Sir Reginald Ashcombe, for instance. He manages certain estates connected to the family. Mr. Lyle. He deals in art, and Lady Davenport had business with him. Miss Grant, Lady Davenport's companion and secretary, and Clara Ashcombe, Sir Reginald's niece. And these were the only guests? Poirot asked. The only ones at dinner. Poirot held up a finger. At dinner. But in the house, there are also servants, staff, perhaps visitors? Doctor, and Reed spread his hands helplessly. The staff of the usual household. No visitors besides us. Poirot's eyes moved, apparently idly, around the room. To the tea service arranged with careful symmetry, to the curtains drawn against the grey afternoon, to the side table where a small vase of lilies stood. He did not touch a thing. Doctor, Poirot said gently, we shall begin at the beginning, not with the poison. No, that is too obvious. We begin with the moment before the glass shattered. You will walk me through the evening, slowly, like a man walking across a floor of thin ice. Dr. Reed drew a long breath. Very well. He described the dinner as best he could, the arrangement of chairs, the courses, the serving of wine, Lady Davenport's toast, the first sign of her distress, the collapse, the immediate confusion, Poirot listened without interrupting, except once, when Dr. Reed mentioned that Lady Davenport's glass had already been filled when the toast was made. "Already filled?" Poirot echoed. "By whom?" "The footman," Dr. Reed replied. "He poured for all of us from the decanter." "And the decanter, where was it before?" Poirot asked. "In the dining room," said Dr. Reed. "It had been placed on the sideboard before we sat." "And who had access?" "The staff, the butler, the footman." Poirot nodded, but I could see he was not satisfied. That was too wide, too easy. "What else?" Poirot asked. Dr. Reed hesitated. During the meal, Lady Davenport asked Miss Grant to fetch something from her study. A paper, perhaps the letter. Miss Grant returned empty-handed. She said she could not find it. Poirot's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She could not find it. "Yes." Lady Davenport was displeased. She said we would speak of it after the coffee. "And yet," Poirot said softly, "she did not live to speak of anything after the coffee." Dr. Reed's shoulders sagged. "No." Poirot rose with sudden decision, smoothing his cuffs. "Then we will speak for her." He turned toward the door. "Bring them to me," he said to Dr. Reed, "but not all at once. One by one. I wish to observe the face when it believes it is alone with me." "And Lady Davenport's study?" I asked. Poirot glanced at me, and for a moment there was amusement in his eyes. "My friend," he said, "you and I will go there now. Where there is a missing letter, there is a mind at work. And where there is a mind at work, there are fingerprints of the soul." We moved through corridors hushed by grief, and at the door of the study, Poirot paused. At the door of the study, Poirot paused. The brass handle gleamed. The lock was old, the keyhole slightly worn. "Tell me," he said, not to anyone in particular, "was this room locked last night?" Dr. Reed, following behind, frowned. Lady Davenport always locked it at night, but she was alive then. After her death, I believe the butler took the key. Poirot's gaze fell upon the keyhole again. "Always locked," he repeated quietly. He opened the door. The study was immaculate, almost aggressively so. Books stood aligned, not merely upright, but evenly spaced. Papers were stacked with mathematical tidiness. A blotter lay precisely centered on the desk, and if murder had visited this room, it had done so with gloves. Poirot stepped inside and stopped at once. On the desk, beside the inkstand, lay a single sheet of paper, blank, except for one faint mark at the top corner, as though a second sheet had been torn away too quickly, leaving the smallest whisper of a fiber behind. Poirot did not touch it. He leaned close, inhaled softly, and then his eyes lifted to the fireplace. There, nestled among the grey ashes, was a fragment of something darker. Charred paper curled into itself like a dying insect. Poirot's face remained composed, but I felt the air tighten around us. "Someone," he said softly, "has been very polite and very thorough." He turned slightly, his voice lowering to a murmur meant only for my ear. "And now," he added, "we will see who in this house has the nerves to burn a letter while pretending to grieve." Poirot remained motionless before the hearth for several seconds, studying the curled fragment within the ash as though it were a living thing that might yet betray itself. He did not kneel at once. Instead, he removed a small pair of gloves from his pocket, grey, immaculate, and drew them on with delicate precision. "My friend," he said quietly, "observe how often the dramatic gesture is undone by the smallest impatience." He crouched and, with the tip of a pencil, coaxed the charred scrap free from the ashes. It was brittle, and a portion dissolved at the faintest pressure, but enough remained to show that ink had once lived there. A slanted hand, confident, the lower half of a word, meant. "Payment?" I suggested. Perhaps, Poirot murmured. Or agreement, or arrangement. It is a fragment, and fragments are like lies. They promise much and deliver little unless one knows where they fit. He rose and turned back to the desk. The blotter lay smooth, but when he angled it toward the light, faint indentations became visible, impressions left by the pressure of a pen. He smiled faintly. Ah. He lifted the blotter carefully and tilted it against the window. In the slanting afternoon light, shallow grooves emerged. He did not attempt to read them fully. There was not enough clarity, but he noted the pattern of the strokes, the firmness of the hand, and the angle. This was written in haste, he observed. The downward strokes are heavy. The writer pressed hard. Emotion, perhaps, or urgency. Dr. Reed stood near the doorway, uneasy. You believe Lady Davenport wrote the letter herself? I believe, Poirot replied, that someone did. Whether she wrote it, received it, or answered it, we shall see. He replaced the blotter precisely as he had found it. His eyes moved around the study once more, searching not for disorder, but for the suggestion of order imposed too carefully. Tell me, Doctor, he said, who besides Lady Davenport possessed a key to this room? The butler has one, Dr. Reed answered. For cleaning purposes, and Miss Grant occasionally, when she assisted with correspondence. Ah, the companion, the secretary, the trusted shadow. Poirot's tone was neutral, but there was thought behind it. And last night, he continued, after Lady Davenport's collapse, who first entered this study? Dr. Reed hesitated. I cannot say for certain. There was confusion, so the servants were called. I remained with the body. Sir Reginald spoke with the butler. And Miss Grant. She left the drawing-room briefly. I assumed she was distressed. Poirot nodded slowly. Distress is a useful companion to solitude. He walked toward the bookshelf and ran his gloved finger lightly along the spines. Not to search for dust, there was none, but to measure alignment. One volume, near the center, sat a fraction deeper than its fellows. He pressed it gently. Nothing happened. He withdrew it. Inside was no hidden cavity, no secret compartment. Only pages, undisturbed. He replaced it with care. My friend, he said softly to me, the burning of a letter is not the act of a fool. It is the act of someone who understands consequences. But such a one must also understand opportunity. So the question is not only who wished that letter destroyed, but who could destroy it without being observed. Dr. Reed shifted. Surely the staff— No, no, Poirot interrupted gently. The staff would not risk such an act unless commanded or bribed. And bribery leaves traces in behavior, in expenditure, in fear. We shall speak with them, yes, but first, the circle at the table. As if summoned by his words, a discreet knock sounded at the door. The butler entered, stiff and dignified despite the strain upon his features. Sir Reginald is prepared to see you, Monsieur Poirot. Excellent, Poirot replied. We shall begin with him. We returned to the morning room, where Sir Reginald Ashcombe stood before the fire like a general awaiting a report from the front. His cane rested against his leg. His jaw was set in habitual authority, as he inclined his head curtly. Monsieur Poirot. Sir Reginald. Poirot did not sit at once. He remained standing, forcing the older man to decide whether to resume his position or remain upright. Sir Reginald chose to stand. You understand, Sir Reginald began, that this situation is intolerable. My niece is deeply shaken. Lady Davenport was family. We expect this matter resolved quickly. Poirot's eyes were mild. Justice is not a carriage, monsieur, to be summoned and dismissed at will. It arrives when it is ready. Sir Reginald's mouth tightened. Then ask what you must. Very well. During dinner, Lady Davenport intended to announce something. Sir Reginald's expression flickered. Just once. You knew of it? Poirot asked softly. She had mentioned certain changes, Sir Reginald said carefully. In financial matters, changes that would affect you. I manage portions of her estate. Naturally, I would be informed. Were you pleased by these changes? Sir Reginald's eyes hardened. My personal feelings are irrelevant. To murder, perhaps, Poirot said gently, but not to motive. There was a pause. I was not pleased, Sir Reginald admitted at last. She had grown suspicious. She believed funds had been misallocated. And had they? Sir Reginald's cane struck the floor once, sharply. Certainly not. Poirot watched him without blinking. And the letter? He asked. Sir Reginald frowned. What letter? Ah, said Poirot softly, as though filing away a small but significant detail. You are unaware of any letter? No. Interesting. Sir Reginald's gaze sharpened. Are you implying? I imply nothing. I observe. Poirot shifted slightly. After Lady Davenport collapsed, did you leave the drawing room? I spoke with the butler in the hall. For how long? 5 minutes, perhaps less. And during that time? Sir Reginald stiffened. Are you suggesting I poisoned her wine and then took a leisurely stroll to burn incriminating documents? I suggest nothing, Poirot repeated calmly. But I note that in moments of chaos, men often find themselves unobserved. Sir Reginald said nothing more. Poirot inclined his head. Thank you, Sir Reginald. I shall next speak with Miss Grant. As we left, I murmured, You do not believe him ignorant of the letter. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. My friend, and ignorance is sometimes the most carefully rehearsed part of a performance. We had not yet reached the corridor when a sudden cry echoed from upstairs, a sharp, startled sound that shattered the house's brittle composure. Footsteps followed. A maid appeared at the head of the staircase, her face drained of all color. Doctor, she gasped. Miss Grant, she's fainted in Lady Davenport's room. Dr. Reed pushed past us at once. Poirot did not move quickly. He stood very still, listening. Fainted, he murmured. Then he turned to me, and there was no softness left in his expression. Come, he said, when grief chooses the very room of the dead, it is rarely accidental. Poirot mounted the staircase with measured steps, neither hurried nor slow, but with the composure of a man who expects to find not chaos, but confirmation. I followed close behind, aware that in this house even the air seemed to listen. Lady Davenport's bedchamber door stood open. Inside, the curtains were half drawn, allowing a diluted grey light to spill across the carpet. The bed had been remade after the removal of the body, its surface smooth and impersonal, as though death had been an unwelcome guest quickly ushered out. Miss Eleanor Grant lay upon a chaise near the window. Dr. Reed knelt beside her, holding a small vial beneath her nose. A maid hovered anxiously. She has only fainted, the doctor said without looking up. A nervous reaction. Poirot entered fully now, his gaze sweeping the room with quiet absorption. Nothing appeared disturbed. The dressing table remained immaculate, the jewelry case closed, the writing slope at the small side desk locked. Miss Grant stirred, in her eyelids fluttering. She drew a shallow breath and pressed her hand weakly to her temple. What? She murmured. You are quite safe, Dr. Reed assured her. You fainted. Her eyes widened suddenly, and she struggled upright. I came to collect Lady Davenport's personal effects. I thought it would be respectful. I did not mean... Her voice trembled convincingly, yet Poirot observed not the tremor, but the sequence. Surprise, explanation, justification. You came alone, mademoiselle? He asked gently. She turned her head toward him. Even pale, she possessed a composure that did not fully dissolve under strain. Yes. And what, precisely, did you intend to collect? Letters, private papers, things that should not be handled by servants. Ah, Poirot murmured. Letters. A flicker crossed her expression. Too swift for Dr. Reed, perhaps, but not for Poirot. "There are many letters in this house," she said carefully. "But perhaps one fewer than yesterday," Poirot suggested. Her fingers tightened upon the fabric of the chaise. "I do not understand." "Do you not?" Poirot's tone remained almost sympathetic. "Last evening, Lady Davenport asked you to retrieve a paper from her study. You returned without it." "Yes, it was not there. And today you come to her bedchamber, again seeking papers." She swallowed. "I was her secretary. It was my duty." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, and loyalty is a most admirable quality." He stepped closer to the fireplace. Unlike the study, this grate had not been recently cleaned. A few small flakes of ash rested undisturbed. "Tell me, mademoiselle," he continued conversationally, "now did Lady Davenport often burn her correspondence here?" Miss Grant's gaze shifted involuntarily toward the hearth before returning to Poirot. "Occasionally," she admitted, "when something was no longer required." "And last night?" "No." "You are certain?" "I would have known." Poirot crouched briefly, examining the grate without touching it. There were no visible remnants of paper, no telltale scraps. Whoever had burned the letter had chosen the study, not the bedchamber. He rose again. "When you fainted," he said lightly, "where were you standing?" "Near the dressing table," she replied. "And what did you see that so distressed you?" Her composure faltered more genuinely now. "Her reflection," she whispered, "in the mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw her standing there." Dr. Reed gave a small, sympathetic sound. "Shock can play tricks upon the mind." "Oui," Poirot agreed softly. "Shock and guilt." The word hung between them. Miss Grant stiffened. "Are you accusing me?" "I accuse no one," Poirot replied calmly. "But I observe that the dead lady intended to reveal something at dinner, something that concerned money, something perhaps connected to a letter, and that letter is now ash." Miss Grant's eyes flashed. "You believe I destroyed it?" "I believe," Poirot said, "that someone did." Dr. Reed rose slowly, tension entering his voice. "Monsieur Poirot, surely this line of questioning, Miss Grant has been devoted to Lady Davenport for years." "Devotion," Poirot said gently, "is sometimes repaid poorly." Miss Grant looked from one to the other. "You must understand, Lady Davenport was not always kind. She could be suspicious. She accused people unjustly." "Accused whom?" Poirot asked quickly. "Sir Reginald, for one. She believed he mismanaged funds." "And did he?" "I do not know." Her answer was immediate. Too immediate. Poirot changed direction without warning. "Tell me, mademoiselle, when the wine was poured, did you notice anything unusual?" "No." "Did Lady Davenport leave the table at any point?" "No." "And you?" She hesitated. "I rose briefly when she asked for the paper." "And you passed near the sideboard?" "Near the decanter?" "Yes, but the footman was there." Poirot studied her for a long moment. "Very well," he said at last. "You may rest." Miss Grant leaned back, visibly relieved, yet still pale. As we stepped into the corridor, Poirot's expression altered. "She did not burn the letter here," he said quietly. That much is certain." "But you suspect she removed it from the study," I said. "Perhaps. But her fainting, that interests me more." "You think it feigned?" "No, I think it was real, but the cause was not grief." He glanced toward the closed bedchamber door. "She came to retrieve something. She did not find it, and in not finding it, she discovered something worse." Before I could ask what he meant, footsteps sounded at the far end of the corridor. Clara Ashcombe approached, her face anxious. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, lowering her voice. "I must speak with you, in private." Poirot regarded her steadily. Of course, mademoiselle. She glanced behind her to ensure no one followed. I did not wish to say this before, she continued. None but last night, just before the toast, I saw someone touch Lady Davenport's glass. Poirot's eyes sharpened at once. Who? Clara hesitated, torn between fear and resolve. I thought it insignificant at the time, she whispered. But now, I'm no longer certain. Speak, Poirot said softly. She drew a breath. It was Dr. Reed. Silence settled over the corridor like a curtain falling. Poirot did not react outwardly, but I saw the subtle tightening at the corner of his eyes. The doctor, he repeated. Yes. He leaned across the table as if adjusting the placement of the glasses. I remember because Lady Davenport laughed and said he was always particular. Poirot inclined his head slightly. And you are certain? As certain as one can be. He nodded once. Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. As Clara retreated, I turned to Poirot in astonishment. You cannot seriously suspect. Poirot lifted a hand. My friend, I suspect everyone. His gaze drifted toward the staircase below, where Dr. Reed's voice could be heard giving quiet instructions to a servant. The doctor was closest to the body, Poirot continued thoughtfully. He declared it the heart. He knew of financial tensions, and now we learn he touched the glass. He paused. But why would Clara choose this moment to speak, and why hesitate before doing so? His eyes gleamed faintly. Ah, he murmured. The game becomes more interesting. And with that, he descended the stairs, not toward the study this time, but toward the dining room where the poisoned burgundy had first been poured, as though the true conversation of the evening had not yet concluded. And of dishes. Yet the arrangement of chairs remained precisely as it had been the previous evening, as though the house itself resisted altering the geometry of that fatal moment. Poirot paused at the threshold and surveyed the room without stepping inside. Nothing, he murmured, is ever truly cleared away. He entered slowly, his gaze moving from chair to chair, reconstructing the positions as though the guests still occupied them. I followed, instinctively lowering my voice. The decanter, I asked. It remains, Poirot replied. Indeed, the crystal decanter stood upon the sideboard, now empty, its surface catching the muted daylight. The glasses had been removed for examination, but faint circular impressions marked their former places on the polished wood. Poirot approached the table and positioned himself where Lady Davenport had sat. He adjusted the chair slightly, aligning it with the edge of the table. Sir Reginald to her right, he said thoughtfully. Miss Grant to her left. Opposite, Mr. Lyle. Dr. Reed at an angle, close enough to lean forward without rising, and Clara beside her uncle. He moved to Dr. Reed's former seat and leaned across the table, extending his hand toward the empty space where Lady Davenport's glass had been. Sir, yes, he said softly. Quite possible. You think Clara's account credible? I asked. I think Clara believes it, Poirot replied. That is not the same thing. He straightened and turned toward the sideboard. The decanter stopper lay beside it. Poirot examined the rim closely. And the poison was introduced into her glass alone, he said. Therefore, either the decanter was untouched and the glass was tampered with after pouring, or the decanter itself was altered in such a way that only her portion was affected. How could that be? I asked. By timing? Poirot replied. Or by knowledge of sequence? He turned back toward the table. When the footman poured, he moved from left to right, Poirot continued, or right to left. We must establish which. If Lady Davenport's glass was filled first or last, or somewhere between, this matters greatly. At that moment, the butler appeared discreetly at the doorway. You wished to see me, monsieur? Oui. You supervised the service last evening? I did. Tell me precisely how the wine was poured. The butler clasped his hands behind his back. The footman began at Sir Reginald's seat and proceeded clockwise around the table. And Lady Davenport? She was served third. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. So, Sir Reginald first. Miss Grant second. Lady Davenport third. Yes, monsieur. And the decanter, had it been opened before entering the dining room? Yes. I personally removed the seal and sampled it in the pantry. You sampled it? I echoed. A small taste, sir, as is customary. And you experienced no ill effects? None whatsoever. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. After the wine was poured, did anyone besides the guests approach the table? No, monsieur. Did anyone rise from their seat before the toast? The butler hesitated only briefly. Miss Grant rose when Lady Davenport requested a paper from the study. See, poison was not in the decanter when poison was not in the decanter when opened, he said quietly. The butler would have been affected. Then it must have been introduced after pouring, I said. Precisely. But Clara claims the doctor touched the glass before the toast. Oui. Poirot returned to Lady Davenport's seat and rested his fingertips lightly on the tablecloth. If the glass had been poisoned after pouring, the culprit required proximity and subtlety, a drop, perhaps, from a small vial concealed within the hand. And Clara saw such a gesture. She saw the doctor lean forward. He began pacing slowly along the length of the table. Now consider, he continued, what does Clara gain by accusing Dr. Reed? Suspicion diverted from her uncle, I suggested. Poirot inclined his head slightly. Sir Reginald stood to benefit from Lady Davenport's continued silence regarding financial irregularities. If she intended to confront him publicly, then removing her would preserve his position, I finished. Perhaps. But if Sir Reginald wished her dead, would he rely on poison in a room full of witnesses, a method so theatrical? Poison can appear natural, I said, as Dr. Reed first suggested. Poirot smiled faintly. Exactly. The declaration of heart failure came swiftly. We fell silent. A soft knock sounded behind us. Mr. Benedict Lisle entered, impeccably dressed despite the circumstances. His composure bordered on elegant detachment. I was told you wished to speak with me, Monsieur Poirot. In due course, Poirot replied pleasantly. For now, perhaps you will indulge me with a small clarification. Of course. During dinner, did you observe any tension between Lady Davenport and Sir Reginald? Lisle's lips curved slightly. They were rarely without tension. Money has a way of souring affection. And last night? She intended to announce something. I could see it in her expression. Did she confide in you? No. Poirot studied him. You deal in art, monsieur. Paintings, sculptures, objects of value. I do. And recently, did Lady Davenport sell anything of significance? Lisle's eyes flickered. Just once. She considered it. Considered, Poirot repeated softly. Yes. A piece from her private collection. But the matter was delicate. Delicate in what way? It concerned provenance, Lisle said carefully. Questions about rightful ownership. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And who questioned it? Lisle hesitated. Lady Davenport herself. Silence settled once more over the dining room. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly against the table. So, he murmured, we have money missing from estates, art of uncertain ownership, a letter now ash, and a glass touched just before a toast. He looked up at Lisle, his expression suddenly intent. Tell me, monsieur, did you at any time handle Lady Davenport's glass? Lisle's composure faltered, though only slightly. No, he said, I did not. Poirot held his gaze for a long moment, then inclined his head. For now, that will suffice. As Lisle departed, I turned to Poirot. You suspect him? I suspect, Poirot replied quietly, that last night was not merely a dinner. He glanced toward the decanter, then toward the doorway leading back to the corridor. It was a reckoning. His eyes grew distant, thoughtful, and someone ensured that the reckoning would never take place. He straightened abruptly. "Come," he said. "We must speak with the footman." His tone had shifted, subtle but unmistakable. A new thread had emerged, and Poirot, meant to follow it before it, too, was reduced to ash. By early evening, Alderwick House felt smaller. The inspector from the authorities had arrived at last, discreet but observant, content, for now, to allow Hercule Poirot to conduct his peculiar theatre. At Poirot's request, Sir Reginald stood near the mantel, rigid. Sir Reginald stood near the mantel, rigid as ever, though the lines around his mouth had deepened. Clara sat beside him, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mr. Benedict Lisle maintained an air of controlled elegance, but his gaze flickered more frequently than before. Miss Grant, pale yet composed, occupied a chair slightly apart from the others. Dr. Malcolm Reed stood near the window, fingers interlaced behind his back, the very image of professional steadiness. Poirot remained standing. "My friends," he began gently, "when poison is served with polite conversation, one must ask not only who had the opportunity, but who required silence." He paced slowly before them. Lady Davenport intended to speak last evening, of money mismanaged, of art whose ownership was uncertain, of a letter. His gaze rested briefly on each face. That letter has been burned, not in her bedroom as might be expected in a moment of grief, but in her study, with haste, with pressure of the pen evident in the blotter beneath. Miss Grant's breathing quickened. Poirot continued calmly. The poison was not in the decanter when opened. The butler tasted it safely. Therefore, it was introduced into Lady Davenport's glass after pouring. He turned toward Dr. Reed, and one person was observed leaning toward that glass before the toast. Clara stiffened. Dr. Reed did not move. "You believe I poisoned her?" "I believe," Poirot said softly, "that you touched the glass. I adjusted it. It was too near the edge." "Ah, oui. So an act of care." Silence hung thick. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "But let us consider something else. Who benefited most from Lady Davenport's silence?" He turned suddenly toward Mr. Lisle. "You deal in art, monsieur. Recently, Lady Davenport questioned the provenance of a certain piece, one she believed had been improperly acquired." Lisle's composure cracked slightly. "Speculation. No, the letter concerned that piece. She had discovered that it had been sold to her under false representation. The rightful ownership was disputed." Lisle said nothing. Poirot continued, voice steady. "She intended to announce her findings publicly, to withdraw from the transaction, to demand restitution. That would have ruined your reputation." Lisle's eyes hardened. "You have no proof?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I have psychology." He turned now to Miss Grant. "You sought the letter in the study because you knew it existed, but when you returned to the drawing-room, it was not yet destroyed." Her face drained of color. "You burned it later," Poirot said softly. "After Lady Davenport's collapse, in the confusion, but you did not burn it to protect yourself." Miss Grant's lips trembled. "No, you burned it to protect someone else." Her eyes filled. Poirot turned at last to Dr. Reed. "Doctor, you knew of Lady Davenport's suspicions. You knew she meant to confront Mr. Lisle. You also knew that if she collapsed suddenly, you could declare it heart failure. A swift pronouncement, discouraging, immediate suspicion." Dr. Reed's voice remained controlled. "That is conjecture." "Is it?" Poirot replied. "You are not merely her physician, and you were financially entangled. You invested, discreetly, in ventures facilitated by Mr. Lisle. If Lady Davenport exposed him, the chain would lead to you." Sir Reginald stared in astonishment. Clara whispered, "Is that true?" Dr. Reed's calm facade fractured. "She was going to ruin us," he said quietly. "Over a misunderstanding, over a technicality and ownership that no one would have questioned." "Except her," Poirot said. "Yes," Dr. Reed snapped, "except her. She would have destroyed reputations, mine included." "And so," Poirot continued, voice unwavering, "you prepared. A rare compound, easily concealed in a small vial. When the wine was poured, you leaned forward under the guise of adjustment and introduced the poison. A single drop was sufficient." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "Miss Grant discovered the truth afterward," Poirot added. "She confronted you. And when she learned what you had done, she burned the letter, not to conceal your guilt, but to prevent scandal, to protect Lady Davenport's name from public disgrace." Miss Grant began to weep silently. Dr. Reed's shoulders sagged, the weight of denial collapsing inward. "I meant only to frighten her," he muttered, "to delay her announcement. I did not realize the potency." Poirot's gaze was unyielding. "You are a physician. You knew precisely what you administered." The inspector stepped forward. Dr. Reed did not resist as he was taken into custody. The drawing room seemed to exhale. Sir Reginald sank into his chair, stunned. Clara stared at the carpet, her earlier accusation now tinged with regret. Lyle remained silent, and his reputation spared immediate exposure, but permanently shadowed. Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "The tragedy," he said quietly, "is not the poison. It is the pride, a fear of humiliation, a refusal to accept correction." He turned to Miss Grant. "Your loyalty was admirable, mademoiselle, but loyalty must never protect wrongdoing." She nodded through tears. As the authorities departed with their prisoner, the fire crackled softly, reclaiming the room from tension. Outside, the winter wind had stilled. Poirot moved toward the door, pausing only briefly. "My friend," he said to me in a low tone, "remember this. It is rarely hatred that kills in polite society." "What then?" I asked. He allowed himself the faintest smile. "Embarrassment." And with that, Hercule Poirot departed Alderwick House, leaving behind a room where civility had masked ambition, and where a single raised glass had revealed far more than a toast ever should.